Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, and joining me today to talk a little Arizona Diamondbacks, a little Snakes versus Rockies over the next 3 days. It's Derek Montilla from PHNX Dbacks. What's going on, buddy?
Not a lot. How you doing, sir?
Hanging in there, man. I can't believe that the season's almost over. Well, at least
I
for
know.
the Rockies, that is. You're sitting pretty again for a second year in a row.
I mean, I think that there's still a lot of baseball to be played, and I'm a little nervous. But yeah, I think for the most part, the Diamondbacks did a good job. I mean, when you talk about they could potentially win tonight's game and already match their win total from last season with 12 games left to go, it's a pretty impressive feat. And I think obviously things haven't gone all their way this season, but they've found a way to win and overcome that adversity.
Yeah, I wanted to save this for later, but we're kind of getting right into it. Is this season almost setting up to break the hearts of Diamondbacks fans this year because of some of the expectations and because of how it's going now? Because to me, I don't think the first 4 months of the season matter at all because I think everything is lining up really well
Sure.
for the Diamondbacks, generally speaking. So is this setting up to be kind of one of those years where, man, everyone's really, really invested right now in the Valley?
I think the only way it could be heartbreaking is if they don't make the postseason. That's pretty much it. Like, I think a lot of fans here realize that this team did some pretty incredible things. And yes, their expectations are probably a little too high, right? Because you do make that assumption sometimes as a fan. Well, we were here and we got better. So since we came, just kind of close to winning the championship, the addition should make us good enough to, win the championship this year. It's a lot to ask. Obviously, the history of the National League and the three teams in 50 years that have repeated as far as, returning to the World Series the following season after making it there, right? It's the Dodgers, the Braves, and the Phillies, right? No 08. And so there's just a difficult nature to repeating because baseball is so random and so chaotic. You just never know what you're going to get. This team right now, I mean, they're getting a lot of their key pieces back, and they have a chance for those guys to, obviously get back into a groove before the postseason comes around. They just have an important stretch between now and then, and they have to win a lot of baseball games here with the way these other teams that are also in this wild card race are playing right now.
Yeah, we'll preview the pitching matchups, the probables for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You're coming off of a really wild game on Sunday, 11-10 win in extras to avoid a sweep at the hands of the Brewers, who it could line up that the Diamondbacks end up playing the Brewers in that wild card round.
Yeah.
What was that game like on Sunday? What did that mean to Arizona?
It was the craziest game of the season. It really was, just in regards to the ups, the downs, how much you thought it was in hand. I mean, the Diamondbacks have done a good job of not getting swept overall this season, but this was one of those series where it hopefully maybe made some fans question if they really want to, if they want to get that smoke in the first round from these Brewers, right? This is a good Milwaukee Brewers team, and I mean, possibly a better one than the one they had last year with Corbin Burns, as part of it. So like, there's just a part of seeing this team. The Diamondbacks have a lot of games in this stretch. They have 3, in this series, and then they have another 4-game series with the Brewers coming up. But it meant a lot in regards to, this race that they're in. And I think confidence for this team, right? I mean, there was a part of it that kind of boosts your confidence, that makes you believe that this team can win any game at any time, no matter, how things are going for them, circumstances, being up and then being down 8-5 after having a 5-run lead. But I think it's also the fact that they can't lose games right now. Like, you have to take every opportunity you can to take these baseball games, especially, I mean, against the teams that you have a better chance of beating. And no slight to the Rockies. I said this earlier today, but man, the Rockies are a team that every time you look up at the scoreboard, they're beating some very good team in baseball. Like, they're not a team you can take for granted. And at this point, I'm sure that they're going to be playing hard for a number of reasons, but the most important to be just to kind of ruin the Diamondbacks' chance, right? Like you're playing a division rival. You kind of want to do everything you can if you're not in the race to impact their race, right? So I don't know, right now about what kind of this stretch is going to hold for the Diamondbacks overall. I know that they have to play their best baseball, and they figured out a way to do it finally against the Brewers in that game, which was again a crazy game where even some of their best pitchers kind of failed them, which really was the hardest part of that loss.
Legigster chiming in there on YouTube in the chat. What's going on? You mentioned the Rockies being spoilers, and that's been their MO for the last 4 or 5 years, where, hey, they don't necessarily have something to play for, but the team in the other dugout does. So they're going to be stepping up. So the Rockies need to step up, and that's all good and well. But you do have a really young team right now for the Rockies, who guys are trying to make a name for themselves, trying to get themselves in a better position and better footing going into 2025 to take a roster spot and be on the opening day roster. And you're right. They nearly swept the Chicago Cubs, had an opportunity to do that, even after the bullpen struggled a little bit, Justin Lawrence mostly. But nevertheless, yeah, they see the Diamondbacks, and there's obvious connection between the two organizations, being the 90s expansion franchises, obviously at different times, and the comments made by the GM about, you know what, the Diamondbacks are kind of the model that we're utilizing, and they might be about a year or so ahead. And it seems like it's a lot more than just a year ahead with the Diamondbacks being as good as they are. So, yeah, they're going to want to take 2 out of 3 and win a series at home at Coors Field, where they do play really well. But the Diamondbacks are playing incredibly well since July 1st, tied for the most wins at 42. Since July 29th, 28 wins, tied with the Padres for most in MLB. And you're right, the Diamondbacks have a lot at stake here, where they can either move up to get a possible home field advantage in the wild card round, where and be the top wild card spot, or they could possibly fall out of the postseason altogether, because right now it is only 2 games that they are ahead of both Atlanta and the Mets, which is crazy to think about. So these games are still incredibly important, and that's part of the genius. Probably too strong of a word, but that's part of the genius of adding a third wild card and creating this additional round, because it just means there's more games that are more important.
Well, it drives my co-host nuts because he feels like the 12-team format makes the 162, game regular season irrelevant. And while I disagree with that, I will say, like, baseball has changed overall. Like, the 162 game season made way more sense when you played your division like 100 plus of those times, right? Because if you could fall back 20 games and somehow make it up because of how many times you still had to play maybe the first place team or your other teams in your division. And baseball just isn't like that anymore, right? So there's a lot of factors that have impacted that. But I think that the third wild card, team makes it fun, right? Makes it exciting. We have a lot of, I don't know, like the last 2 years, the National League representative in the World Series came from the final spot in the wild card there. So it just means that it gives teams an opportunity to understand if you can get in, then you have a chance to make it in the playoffs. And there's also arguably something to be said about, the layoff that the teams that, the number 1 and number 2 team receive isn't maybe necessarily the greatest thing for those teams, because staying in a groove is definitely a part of baseball. I just, I think it's fun. I think the playoffs are fun. I think baseball is more fun than ever. I think the changes that they've made to the game lately and impacting the time of game and the speed of the game have all made it a more entertaining form of watching sports. And I think people are coming out to the ballpark and watching for that exact reason.
I have a sneaky suspicion I might have a chance to talk with your co-host, our baby brother Jesse, as it were. I think I might
make sure he drinks some water, please. He never drinks enough water.
Yeah, I think I'll be talking with him a little bit over the next 3 days. But I mean, I agree with him that having all those wild cards does make the regular season, or rather, it does take something away from the postseason, because you could win 95 games and be the third best division winner, and then lose 2 games in a row and your season's over. But we also lived in a world in which if you won 95 games and were the third best team in your league, you didn't even go to the postseason. So
It's true.
it's a hard
True.
balance, and I think the system now is pretty good, and yeah, the postseason is just like a whole other season. Now we're seeing that. That's obviously the case in hockey for hockey fans following the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. It's like a whole new season where anybody can win. I think that's true in baseball too, and you know what? That's okay. Derek, when you hear the Colorado Rockies right now in 2024, who do you think of? Who is the face of the Rockies?
Brenton Doyle.
This is becoming a dumb question because everyone is saying Brenton Doyle now. And you're right. He's really just ascended to that spot. Last year, there almost seemed like there was no face with Chris Bryant having the name recognition and having the contract, Charlie
Sure.
Blackmon having somewhat of a renaissance, Tovar and Doyle as rookies, Nolan Jones coming out of nowhere with a 20 homer, 20 stolen base season. And it was just a bunch of guys trying to figure it out. But you're right. And I'm still probably going to continue to ask people in other markets.
No, you should,
Fun
because
to hear.
it is. And not only that, but I mean, it means something, right? That's something that sometimes for an organization like the Diamondbacks or the Rockies, it's hard when we are struggling to have any kind of player get the recognition they deserve when they are playing as well as some of our players have, right? But it's like, okay, great. That one guy is on there. Maybe he'll make the all-star team, things like that. But it doesn't really become like that where it's the face of the franchise, or you feel like there's something that person is going to be a part of building towards in the future, right? I've talked about it a lot, but the idea of figuring out who your core is and then building around that core is a huge part for teams like ours, right? We're not going to suddenly go out there and spend a ton of money and make a big splash in free agency and bring in all these big names and then build around those guys. Typically, it's going to have to be guys we got through trades or brought up through the organization that you draft, and then you kind of have go through their progression and make it to a major league level, like so many of these young players that we have on these teams are doing. But it's that core is important, to figure out who you're going to build around, who you're going to have as your faces of the team, and it has to be more than one. And then when you get to a point where those guys are figuring out a way to win and have success, that's when hopefully a team, like the Rockies, can go out and spend some money, spend the money they haven't been spending, and support those young guys with, whatever holes in your lineup or holes in your, pitching that you might have at that point. But I think that's one thing the Diamondbacks did. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for them as well as you would like to see, right? You go out and you get someone like Jordan Montgomery, who has been, and he'll be the first one to say it, a failure, a disappointment for this team this season, so there's been money spent. It just didn't necessarily bring in, the best in every, I guess, transaction that the Diamondbacks went out and spent money on, but you still have your Jock Petersons that ended up being one of the best free agency pickup in all of baseball. So you can't say that everything they did was, didn't help make this team better. Geno Suarez being brought in through trade, Randall Grichuk, there's been a lot of pieces that they brought in this offseason that has made this team, as well-rounded as it has been. And it allowed them to overcome those injuries that they've sustained this season.
Yeah, you run off that list of those veteran guys, and a couple of them are almost coming off the bench, like a Randall Grichuk. And
right.
The depth is like off the charts. I was looking and it's like, okay, Jordan Lawler's back, right? He was kind of hurt the first part of the year. I think he's active now, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
I
like
think he
he's
just got promoted
languishing
from AA to AAA back.
Yeah.
So he's
He's
getting
just
there.
hanging out in Reno. This is a guy that you're like, this is an impact player, and could be integral come playoff time. Like that's the kind of depth that the Diamondbacks have. That's again really promising to feel good that if somebody does go down, because someone will, they always do, you've got somebody to step up. Monday, we've got the return of Antonio Senzatela for the Rockies, coming back from Tommy John surgery. Not sure how long he'll go. Maybe about 75 pitches, should that go well. He goes against Merrill Kelly. Tuesday, Ryan Feltner against, looks like it's going to be Jordan Montgomery. And on Wednesday, Austin Gomber versus Eduardo Rodriguez, a player who should have worn the purple pinstripes. I've said this multiple times. If you know this, you can go ahead and fast forward 45 seconds. But it was, I believe it was 2015. A deal was struck, according to Peter Gammons. A deal was struck with the Baltimore Orioles to trade Jorge De La Rosa to the Orioles for Eduardo Rodriguez. And once it got onto the desk of owner Dick Monfort, he said, well, Jorge De La Rosa, he's an all-time Rocky great. I know he's going to be a free agent at the end of the season, but we'll re-sign him. And we don't want to trade away a guy like that for 2 months just to get a really good left-handed starting pitching prospect. And yeah, the Orioles went and got Andrew Miller from the Red Sox, and Eduardo Rodriguez went to Boston. So I always think of that, obviously, when Eduardo Rodriguez's name comes up. You mentioned about Jordan Montgomery. He went to the bullpen after his August 21st start, but
Correct.
From that point, 4.85 ERA, not great, better than his 6.44 ERA when he was in the rotation. Also had 2 scoreless outings, combined for 7 1/3 scoreless frames. Do you think that maybe he can finally get himself back on track? I knew it was a similar situation with Blake Snell, right? Snell took a while, and then he really started to light it up. Maybe now is the time for Jordan Montgomery.
I was impressed because obviously Jordan Montgomery wasn't happy about being moved to the bullpen, but it was the right decision regardless of payroll, right? You can't make your decisions based on payroll. Ryan Nelson not only was pitching better than Jordan Montgomery, he was arguably pitching better than everybody in the starting rotation. So it just didn't make sense to send Nelly to the bullpen or send Nelly down to Reno to stay stretched out. Jordan Montgomery he was the one that wasn't performing, and this is a performance-based business, right? So again, he wasn't happy about it, but considering that he's not a reliever and needed to figure out how to like get ready in the speed that a reliever is required to get ready, I thought he did a good job of adapting to the situation and eventually becoming somewhat of a secret weapon for this team, right? Because not only was he able to go out there and give them 3 to 4 to 5 innings on any given night out of the bullpen, but he started, like you said, he started to become actually good in that role. He started to become just a guy that could go out there and at least keep them in games, especially games that might have gotten away from them. And with the offense performing like the way that they have, I mean, in a couple of instances, it allowed the Diamondbacks to actually come back. I think that, Jordan Montgomery is still a very good pitcher. The results are there. You look at his past. Obviously, any baseball player can suddenly fall off suddenly, and it sucks. That's what makes this sport so hard, is even the best player can suddenly become mediocre to below average for no reason other than, maybe what's going on up here, right? Like not because of their actual ability, not because of they're less athletic than they were, but because of suddenly they just can't, get their things together, especially with pitching. Jordan Montgomery had an tumultuous offseason with everything that he's kind of covered, and considering he fired Scott Boras as his agent, you could tell that he was not happy with the way this offseason went. It kind of makes you feel like he didn't want to end up in Arizona, or at least not in Arizona on this short term of a deal. This was supposed to be his big payday. He was part of the Boras 4. He was supposed to get his big contract, and he didn't. And I think that there was probably a cloud that hung over him in regards to how everything went down. And I think that might have impacted, him pitching, right? And it got to a point where one of the best available starting pitchers on the market suddenly became the most expensive reliever with a +6 ERA in all of baseball, right? So he still has shown lately, I think, that he can do it. And I mean, this is the depth the Diamondbacks have, where when Ryan Nelson goes down on the 15-day IL with shoulder inflammation, you can have Jordan Montgomery, the guy who was literally the World Series hero last year, step up and take a role back in the starting rotation for this team. And I mean, I say, forget everything that you've done before this. Like, this is it. Start from here. You have a great opportunity. You have a fresh start. If you can pitch like you were pitching out of the bullpen recently, you can be an absolute hero and an asset for this team going down this stretch into the postseason.
Can't help but think who's faring better right now, the Boras 4 or the Wyatt 6, but we'll have to talk about that off air. I again want to talk about
started on that, Patrick.
I want to talk more about some of the series preview guys that are hot, guys to look out for on the Diamondback side for Rockies fans to either clench tightly on or feel a little bit more comfortable with. But would you characterize Corbin Carroll's 2024 as a sophomore slump?
I would characterize everything up until July 9th as that, yes. But I think that maybe there just came a point where Corbin just got over it. Like you could tell he was very unhappy playing the game. Even on a night where he contributed, he just didn't look like himself. He didn't look like he was having fun out there. And I mean, he's not like Ketel Marte, where when he's out there, you literally look like he's having the time of his life. Like Corbin Carroll takes the game of baseball very seriously, and he's a student of the game. So there is that to him. But I mean, like when we would talk to him in the clubhouse afterwards, or even before a game, he when he was going through those struggles, he just wasn't himself. And I think obviously it's because he cares about like playing baseball at an elite level so much that when he's not, his mood and everything is impacted. And it's a cyclical thing there, right? But eventually he broke out, and I think that what he's done over that time frame since the beginning of July has been exactly what we saw out of him last year. And you could even say that sophomore slump extended back into the end of the last season, because after he had that shoulder injury scare last year, he definitely wasn't himself from that point on through the regular season. I do think he's swinging a bit more freely. We talked about how flat his swing was early on in the season. Like he had the flattest swing through the swing plane in like baseball, right? And so I don't know, there is a bit of him going with that one-handed follow through at the end that maybe we saw him doing more of a two-handed follow through when he was having that issue with his shoulder, a couple of other things. But I mean, he's just been very valuable to this team in a number of ways. Even in that win against the Brewers, he was the reason why they were able to score, the tying run. Not a lot of guys on a wild pitch can get from first to third in the way Corbin Carroll can. And that ended up being very critical to the Diamondbacks winning that baseball game.
Diamondbacks are hitting a lot of home runs right now, going to Coors Field for these 3 games. 5.48 runs per game leads the majors over the Yankees and Dodgers, ranked second in club history. They got 71 homers since August 1st, most in the MLB. They're hitting them in bunches, 24 games with 2 or more homers in the majors, head of the Dodgers, head of the Astros, 35 homers in their last 20 games in MLB. So they're slugging right now at the right time. Is Eugenio Suarez going to be the guy that comes away this weekend with the most homers? He was a player that was super hot in July. Speaking of our buddy Jesse, he reached out to me, I think on July 31st going, I was all set to write an article about Eugenio Suarez, getting ready to write about him being July's player of the month. And then I saw what Bretton Doyle had done, and I had to scrap that entirely. But Suarez has stayed hot through August as well.
Yeah. I mean, Gino's just been incredible. I mean, I think right now he is beyond what we could have expected despite the disappointing start to his season. And again, there were a lot of guys. I think there were just a lot of guys that felt the pressure for different reasons, coming over to a new team like Gino did. I think that was part of what he was going through. He just, no matter how much he struggled at the plate, he was still better defensively than any options the Diamondbacks had. So they had no choice but to kind of play him. And they tried at times. Like his offense was so bad that he had to go, they turned to Kevin Newman, they turned to Blaze Alexander. There were a number of guys that they tried over there at third base. But Gino just snapped out of it. Again, there was something that happened there in the beginning of July, and I can't explain it, but it's for a lot of these guys, Corbin, Gino, like these guys all of a sudden came online. And like early on when the Diamondbacks were struggling for wins, anytime Ketel could get some help, anytime another guy in the lineup could have a big night, this team was winning ball games. And if you had a night where, you had multiple guys going off, then they were scoring like 15 runs and you were thinking, what is this team, right? It's just, it's a matter of the contributions from other players outside of, Ketel Marte, right? And like throughout July, that's what was happening. They were getting lots of contributions from all over the place. And that's how this team is built. Like you talk about all those home runs. Yeah, they might have, they might have Gino hit 30. They might have Christian Walker get close. It's not going to happen. But like, despite all that big total of home runs, you're not going to look across the board and see like anybody stand out too much, because this team is like a team now that is contributing from all parts. And I think that's when they're their deadliest. That's how they were constructed. I don't think any of us expected to see this team leading the league in any offensive categories the way that they are, right? Like we thought quite the opposite. We were like, the starting rotation is going to be dope for the Diamondbacks. I don't know. Maybe they'll do the create chaos thing again. I don't know. And instead, it was quite the opposite. The starting rotation, due to injuries and everything, has absolutely struggled this season, but the offense has picked up the slack and has been incredible, right? Like Suarez, though, he's been probably the biggest part of it because, I mean, I think he's tied for 14th in all of Major League Baseball in RBI. And that's not something that you would have predicted in a million years, dating back to, how he was struggling in May.
It's true. He's just been so incredibly good. And we talk about all these guys hitting home runs, and we didn't even mention Pavin Smith, who all of a sudden you get something out of it. This 3-homer game. Is he the Diamondbacks version of Jake Cave? Now Jake Cave for the Rockies, he's been for a while, for the entire summer. It's been the summer of Jake Cave, where if a big rally gets started, he's usually going to be at the front of that. He's going to be in the middle of it. And if Jake Cave goes, the Rockies end up going when they're behind. Who's the player that's kind of sneaky underrated, that when they come to a plate late in the game, Rockies fans just know this guy's got that thing in him?
I honestly want to say Geraldo Perdomo. I say it not because of maybe the big home run or whatever, but there's something about when Geraldo Perdomo comes up, you feel like things are going to get started. You feel like he's going to find a way to get on base, and you feel like a rally is imminent, and it's going to be started because Perdomo got things started. As far as Pavin has just been a guy that just situationally has been amazing. He's stepped up when called upon, despite the fact that he's had, very limited amount of at bats. He's been up and down as many times as you can imagine a player being up and down. Not even due to his play. Like he'll perform well, but they'll send him down because they have too many outfielders and he has options left, and it's pretty much just the way that they have to manage the roster. But I mean, Pavin, he's a guy that is incredibly good late in those games. I mean, saw his 3-home run game, aka the Pavin Smith game. So I mean, I don't know, that's what this team is. Like, again, this team is really weird when it comes to that, because there is a different hero every night, and there is an unlikely hero. I mean, you've had everybody from Kevin Newman to, Adrian Del Castillo getting called up as, and in his first week as a Major League Baseball player being the hero in several games. Like, this team just finds a new player to be that guy that provides them that spark or that offense. However, Perdomo just does it, like, it feels like on a nightly basis. I feel like he's always the guy that gets things started, and he gets this team fired up.
Jerry P. You don't have to convince me. I saw it all last October. That was the guy. Whereas when he came up, he felt good.
This man, when he says what's your favorite moment in sports, and he said when he's down 0-2 in the count, injected into my veins directly. Like, that's a ball player that says when I'm down 0-2 in the count, that's when the real at bat starts. Let's go. I love that attitude.
Yeah, he's an interesting cat. Finally, before we get out, Justin Martinez, is he going to be closing out games now with Seawold kind of, struggling here on the IL? Is it going to be AJ Puck? Is that maybe the biggest concern right now?
I think that Torey refuses to address the situation at all, because in honesty, he tried to call it the closer by committee last year, and it was a disaster. It didn't matter who they put in late. It felt like everybody was shaky and could not get the job done. They traded for Paul Sewald, and suddenly, this bullpen could lock these games down. And you received so much feedback from the other members of the bullpen that said once Sewald got there and they knew who their closer was, that everybody knew what their role was. Everybody kind of lined up after that. And I think that's the only reason why this situation isn't great for the Diamondbacks, is players in the bullpen don't know their role, right? But I think essentially, yes, like what you're saying is right. Justin Martinez is their closer. Torey just doesn't want to, I think, put that name on it, right? Because then if he doesn't go with Justin Martinez for some reason late, and he decides to use J Mart in the 8th and go with Puck in the 9th, people are like, wait, hold on, you said You said Justin Martinez was your closer. I think Torey likes that flexibility, and he's always kind of wanted it, like, which makes sense, right? There's no other. I mean, I know it makes sense to have a setup man and a closer and all that, but in today's game of baseball, we just don't have the dominant closers that we used to have, back in the 90s, right? So it feels like the idea of having maybe two high leverage guys, a lefty and a righty, that you can go to late in games, and depending on how things line up, that's who you're going to go with, seems to make a bit more sense to me than, just having one guy be your full-time closer all the time, and that's like his anointed title. So I think we'll see a combination of both, but for the most part, I'm sure Justin Martinez will be in there, for this stretch up to the postseason, closing games out.
To me, it really seems like Torey Lovullo is kind of Paul Heyman in this situation. He doesn't want to put his finger up for Justin Martinez because he knows the OTC, the original team closer, Paul Sewald, is waiting there.
Wow. Yeah.
Come on.
You can't. You gotta acknowledge your head of the table, right? And honestly, Paul Sewald does bring so much more than just what he does in the game. But I mean, I think so many Diamondbacks fans are done with that. I think Paul Sewald has been given opportunities. I think he blew enough consecutive saves that people didn't feel comfortable in there with him at late. But Torey continued to say that, he wanted Sewald back in that role. So I think anything could happen once this team hits the postseason. If they do. Let's put that on it.
I would be shocked. I had way more confidence in the Diamondbacks than the Padres going into this season, even still mid-season. So that would be surprising. We'll get a lot more information over the course of the next 3 days with this Rockies series between the D-backs and Colorado. Derek, go ahead and plug away. Let folks know where they could find out all your awesome content.
You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at cap_caveman with a K. Also Instagram. You can follow our show at PHNX_Dbacks. But of course, make sure to follow Jesse and Friedman, and make sure to tell him to drink some water because he's always dehydrated.
I'm glad we also didn't have to bring up Archie Bradley. It's Rockies fans don't want to hear that. And here I go. I still mentioned it. All right. At Patrick D. Lyons.
Follow my co-host, Archie Bradley, at Archie Bradley 7. I should plug him as well, just in case you guys forgot about him. He's also part of our show now. So join us for that. That's fun.
Well, you're like on autopilot. I know I am. Like when you get to the plugs, you're like, I've been saying the same thing for 3 years. And then all of a sudden, boom, you guys get your own OTC. You get your own team closer.
Yeah. I got to put one up in the air for our tribal chief for sure.
That's it. Archie gets one. All right. At Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB. As everyone's saying, what momentum you've given me, Derek. Appreciate it. But that momentum is only as good as my next show. So I will talk to you tomorrow.